Japanese paintings, music albums, photographs, Japanese prints, all these things which I really loved had to be buried or destroyed. My father and I put in a crate and buried in the backyard.
What was it like for you during the war, I asked, to be liberators in Italy and France while your families were prisoners at home? What was it like, I asked, to interrogate Japanese prisoners of war in New Guinea while wearing the same face as the enemy? The silence was impenetrable. No one had talked about it these 40 years, but everyone had something they could not forget. Digging through memory, pieces of the past reveal an untold story of terrible choices and redeeming courage.
I always wanted to go back and dig up that crate.
What was it like? We grew up in California, farming. The land was home. At different times, we grew carrots, good carrots, lettuce, and the biggest, best strawberries you ever saw. It wasn't particularly a good land, lots of hard granite, lots of clearing away of boulders so we could plant. But when we had to leave for camp, I really missed it. We raised our whole family, 7 kids here. All the time we were away in camp, I kept remembering what we had, what we lost. Mama was always saying, anything we did, we had to keep trying to do it better, do it well, even if you didn't get rewarded for it. That's the way they were, Mama and Papa, hardworking, and so honest it hurt.
Are you going away again?
Just for the summer, I'm going to Alaska to work in the cannery. Pays pretty good. I'll be back soon. Okasa-san! Kairimashita! Tadaima!
Nissan came home to see us in his uniform. We didn't really believe the war was coming and what would happen to him or to us. We were all busy working. The folks used to say, すべて子供のために, everything for the sake of the children. And us kids worked hard to do well in school. The farm was just beginning to really make it when everything fell apart.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Stay tuned to WOR.
The day after Pearl Harbor, the FBI came and took Papa away.
December in 1941. It was a Sunday. I clearly remember that day. I was gardening on this particular Sunday when the lady of the house came out and told me that Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. It didn't mean anything to me. I didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. Her words were that the Japs had bombed Pearl Harbor. So I said, oh, is that so? And I said, where is Pearl Harbor? And she said, it's in Hawaii. I said, oh, that's terrible. And then she said, I want you to go home. So I said, why? And she said, well, this was a terrible thing that Japan did. And she didn't think that I should continue working for them. And so I left.
But it was these older people, the Issei, who would be of the same age as my father and mother, that I really took notice of. It was toughest on them. They lost all their personal property, their businesses. Everything went down the drain for them.
No. Don't dig it too money.
Okay.
Sometimes I would suddenly remember something. I can still see the guys from our camp, the volunteers for the Army, sitting out there in the desert in their Sunday best.
Long before Pearl Harbor, inequality was a daily experience for Japanese Americans. Finding a neighborhood to live in was not an easy thing. Their foreign-born parents were stopped by laws from owning land or becoming citizens. Many jobs and entire occupations were closed to them.
I could very well have ended up on a produce stand, even with an AB degree, because many of my predecessors did. And in fact, say around 1939, 2 years before Pearl Harbor, I know some Cal graduates in engineering. And Cal Berkeley has a top, engineering department. They couldn't get jobs in the United States when engineers were in demand already.
Pearl Harbor gave license to open acts of continuing hostility.
It seemed like all the authorities were against us. The Congress, the Army, the governors and mayors, the newspapers, they all wanted us out. There were so few of us. Our leaders were all taken away, even our own fathers. And we Nisei were so young and inexperienced. But we were citizens and we could speak English. So we had to go and deal with all the suspicion and those accusations. The headlines were full of scary stories of Japan's victories, and the people wanted something done. The accusations came from the Secretary of War, the Attorney General of California, and the General in charge of the Western Defense Command.
The Japanese race is an enemy race. We cannot trust even the citizen Japanese.
Japanese farmers have infiltrated every strategic spot. On this map, you can see Japs adjacent to all dams supplying water to San Diego, Japs adjacent to Southern Pacific Railroad, Japs in the vicinity of Oakland Airport.
The very fact that no sabotage has taken place is a disturbing indication that such action will be taken.
The Growership of Vegetable Association is charged with wanting to get rid of the Japs for selfish reasons. Well, we might as well be honest, we do. If all the Japs were removed tomorrow, the white farmers could take over. And we don't want them back when the war ends either.
Mr. President, you signed the executive order so the Army could handle the Japs. It was never intended to apply to Italians and Germans.
There isn't any such thing as a loyal Japanese.
There isn't any such thing as a loyal Japanese.
In spite of government intelligence reports that the suspicions were without basis, the President signed the Executive Order 9066. It allowed the Army to uproot and remove Americans of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast and detain them in camps under guard.
And those who were confined there were without any criminal records. They were, as a matter of fact, they weren't charged at all for any crime. They weren't, there was no indictment, no trial, no hearing, and yet they were taken into these camps and confined for what reason? Just because they happened to be of Japanese ancestry.
Men, women, and children, young and old alike, citizens born and raised in America and their foreign-born parents. When they came for the orphans at the orphanage, the priest objected, and the director of the removal program replied that anyone should be interned if they had even one drop of Japanese blood. Throughout the West Coast, families and communities were scattered and taken to detention camps in deserts and swamps, from California to Idaho to Wyoming to Arkansas. No one would believe that at the very moment the military trains were carrying the families away because they could not be trusted, at the Presidio Army headquarters in San Francisco, their soldiers, sons, and brothers were working intensively to master the Japanese language. A secret Army language school, the first of its kind, had to be created to teach Japanese military language needed by America for the war in the Pacific. A faculty was hastily assembled and teaching materials created from scratch. The academic director was John Iso, Private John Iso, graduate of Brown University and Harvard Law School.
Rather amusing that I was first told I was to be a student at the 4th Army Intelligence School. And then a few days later, I was told you're going to be an assistant instructor, a part-time student, and a part-time instructor. And then a week or 10 days later, I was told you're going to be the head instructor of this school. I had never been an educator, and I had been a lawyer, but I didn't know what it was going to take to set up a school. So I had to begin to think in various ways to improvise and see what the plans were.
The war was on, and rumors were flying. There were no planes over San Francisco, but the papers reported it. Anyone who looked Japanese was deeply suspected. At the Presidio, the Army took away the guns of the Nisei soldier language students, and they worried what would happen to them next.
A Kibe student came to me and said, Sensei, meaning instructor or professor, I'd like to speak to you, but I'd like to speak in private, not here. And he said, Sensei, shouldn't we go over the hill at this time? And I said, what for? He says, this may be our last chance. And I said, but where are you going to go? And he said, can you guarantee that I will not be among those, and whether we will not be lined up tomorrow morning and shot. I told him that I could give no such guarantee, but that the whole future of Nisei and our children in America depended upon how we would act on this occasion.
How would they act on this occasion? In the internment camps, young people were facing that question. Army recruiters came into the camps, searching first for volunteer military intelligence soldiers for the war in the Pacific, and then later they came looking for volunteer combat soldiers for the war in Europe.
I did not want to volunteer because my father was interned. How could I willingly join the United States Army when my father was classified as an enemy alien?
Learning his father was ill, Barry Psyche got permission to visit him. He traveled from his detention camp in Arkansas to his father's internment camp in New Mexico. The men held there were thought by the government to be special security risks. The community leaders, Buddhist priests, teachers of Japanese language, martial arts, and heads of community organizations. Across the Pacific, another group of fathers were also rounded up by the FBI. They were also taken away, but here, there was no mass removal of their families. The territory of Hawaii, thousands of miles closer to the Pacific enemy, and attacked at Pearl Harbor, yet there was no internment. Here, Japanese Americans were not a minority, but 1/3 of the population. They were not less suspicious, but their labor was needed for the war. Free of imprisonment, free to choose, Hawaiian youth responded to the call to service by the thousands. How different it was for volunteers in the mainland camps, each one making a lone and difficult choice.
When they came to recruit us from Minnesota, they're asking us that we need interpreters and translators for our war in the Pacific. Well, my temper cooled down, and I thought about my rights as an American. I said, if war ends, I still want to stay in my own country, because to me, Japan is an alien nation, and I never approve of Japan invading China or Manchuria. I know when I left camp, there must have been a lot of people saying I'm a stupid fool, especially when I had guns pointed at me several times, and yet I volunteer. But this is the only country I have.
While some Nisei youth left the camps to go off to war, others left camp to go to jail. At the internment camp at Heart Mountain, Wyoming, 63 Nisei youth refused to be drafted into the Army. Theirs was the largest mass trial for draft resistance in the history of this country. Frank Emmy and the Fair Play Committee had organized meetings in the camp mess hall to discuss their constitutional rights as U.S. citizens. They said it was wrong to be drafted from a concentration camp.
Until we are restored all our rights, all discriminatory features of the Selective Service abolished, and measures are taken to remedy the past injustices through judicial pronouncement or congressional act, we feel that the present program of drafting us from this concentration camp is unjust, unconstitutional, and against all principles of civilized usage. We members of the Fair Play Committee hereby refuse to go to the physical examination or to the induction if or when we are called in order to contest the issue. We were charged with the conspiracy to violate selective service and to counsel and advise others to violate selective service laws. That was a charge.
I didn't understand it at that time. Many of us, I think most of us, thought they were cowards and even traitors to the cause of the Japanese Americans. We saw these rows and rows of tar-papered barracks, and then we said, wow, we're going to live here, the barbed wire fences and with the guard towers and with the soldiers there. And there was absolutely no privacy, so some of them had to put up blanket partitions or something like that to give them a little sense of privacy. And as the years went on, tempers began to be frayed, tensions arose, volunteers were being beaten up, and some very seriously with lead pipes or 2x4s. The recruiter said that here is an opportunity for you right now to prove that you're a good American.
There were 14 Nisei and Kibe, that is a total of 14, who volunteered. And reaction was violent. Rocks were thrown at my mother's apartment, windows broken. And we had to be snuck out of camp at 3 o'clock in the morning. That was our exodus and sayonara to Minidoka.
The lawyer had said, you have a strong moral case, but a weak legal one. 85 resistors from Heart Mountain went to federal prison for their beliefs.
And that group, too, I have deep respect for because they had the courage to stand up to their convictions. And they were right. That's what they believed in. They should have, and they had every right to oppose the draft at that time.
The day came when the FBI arrived to take the resistors away. It was their time to say goodbye.
I remember my parents saying, we better take a picture since you're going to be away from us for a while, and we had a family picture taken while we were there. I have it someplace in there, in my home.
With America at war, another group of Japanese Americans already in the Army had a difficult experience. Born here, but raised in Japan and speaking with a strong accent, they were not treated like soldiers. Left behind when their units went overseas, assigned instead like convicts to labor battalions, they were told in 1,000 ways that they could not be trusted. And 28 of these men as a group refused a routine military order and were court-martialed for insubordination. The detention barrack boys were locked up for refusing to go on with combat training unless they were given assurances about their imprisoned families and the rights of all Japanese Americans were restored.
I didn't like that the way the U.S. government treat that Japanese American, so especially my wife. They put my wife in a concentration camp. Oh, the government don't have no respect, just to go by power. That I didn't like it.
The last straw for the detention barrack boys was when President Roosevelt came to visit the troops at Fort Riley, Kansas. Spirits were high in anticipation of the president's visit. Then, a group of 200 Nisei were singled out, marched away from the camp to a warehouse, and held at gunpoint for the president's safety. The Nisei felt hurt and betrayed that night.
Captain O'Connor called me up to his office. He asked me, did you write the letter to War Department? I said, yes. What did you write? So I told him that I wrote about President Roosevelt incident. Why you didn't get my permission? So I said, if I get your permission, you're going to hold the letter. So Captain O'Connor told me, that's against regulation if you don't get the permission from me to write a letter to War Department. So you know that? I said, yes. Then I could put you in the guardhouse for that against regulation. So I just kept quiet. At that time, I was PFC. So he told me, I'm going to take out the PFC and 1 month barracks confinement. Other NSS soldier told me that I told you, if you write letter to War Department, what happened to you? So we told you, don't do that. But I told them, I sacrifice all you people. Then they said, they don't say anything. They just kept quiet.
At his court-martial in 1944, Private Nozawa said, "I will fight for this country to protect democracy as I am a real American, regardless of my Oriental face. I respect Abraham Lincoln as a real democratist for giving freedom and equality to every kind of people. President Lincoln is a real American. I wish every American will become like him."
We talked to other nations. You guys fight. You guys join to 442nd, fight for the country. I mean, fight for the United States. And we 28 guys stay in the stockade and fight for the U.S. constitutional right for the American soldier.
Mr. and Mrs. Mao are like parents to me. And so when I was in Tulare Assembly Center, they came to visit me, which is a very difficult thing to do at that time because gas was rationed and tires were rationed, and in spite of that, they came up to Tulare to see how we're doing. I looked upon them as like a father and mother, and I think they looked upon me as one of their own, because they had no children. And when you went in the Army, they had a star on the window, so they had one out there for me.
When our guys came back to camp to say goodbye to their girlfriends and families, they had a lot on their minds. They were worried about their families, about what would happen while they were gone. Would they come back alive? If they were crippled, how would they help their folks who had already lost everything and had no home to go back to?
My mother turned around and she went through a 100-pound sack of rice, and she found one rice that still had its kernel on it. And she put that in a little bag and she presented that to me. And she said, "This one rice must be very lucky because with all those thousands and thousands of kernels of rice that was in that sack, it's the only one that still had its kernel on. So it's got to be very lucky, and they'll bring you back." And I wore this sack around my neck all during the time that I was overseas. And I feel it brought me luck.
You come back someday. I'll see you again soon. Okay.
J'avais 16 ans au moment de la bataille de la libération de Bruyères et j'ai été blessé le 10 octobre 1944. Je crois qu'il y a peu de mots pour parler de la bravoure des gens. Et je sais Je sais que leur silence à ces soldats est significatif.
When they liberated Bruyère, it was terrible fighting from house to house. There were many casualties. These young Japanese-American soldiers, the wounded and the dying, we took into our own homes to care for. We have never forgotten them.
When my mother saw the first troops who was going into the village, she has got trouble, and she was not sure who was these troops. And she said, my God, it could be Japanese. Why Japanese here? The Japanese has to fight somewhere else, I mean Pacifics, you know? And maybe 2-3 minutes after, she knows that this Japanese was American, in fact. And she was crying. She said, it's incredible. Now we have got freedom. We are sure. We get it. We got it for a long time. Il faut avoir souffert pour pouvoir parler de la souffrance des autres. Alors c'est pour ça qu'aujourd'hui, je parlerai de la souffrance des Nisei. Je parlerai de tout ce qu'ils ont fait. Je parlerai de tout ce qu'ils ont enduré. Je parlerai parce que eux aussi, ce sont des gens comme moi qui sont couverts de cicatrices. Alors, quand on est couvert de cicatrices, on ne parle pas de ce que l'on a fait.
Thousands of miles away in Minnesota, the secret language school was racing ahead. Students were intently preparing for the day when they would go into the field to interrogate prisoners, translate captured documents, intercept communications, and write propaganda. In the field, the head of the team would always be a Caucasian officer because the Nisei were still not entirely trusted and usually did not rise above the rank of sergeant. It was an awkward situation when interrogating a high-level prisoner or trying to negotiate favorable terms of surrender. Even the school's academic director had to be made into a civilian because at the beginning they would not commission him. The teachers at the school were almost entirely Kibe, educated for the most part in Japan. Throughout the Army, Navy, and Marines, all military language training in Japanese depended heavily on the Kibe as teachers. The Kibe were those U.S. citizens whose parents had sent them to schools in Japan. There, they had tried to look and act Japanese and still met with some rejection for their American ways. Like their students, the faculty were recruited from the internment camps and shared with students the same concerns for families left behind. Some of the faculty went on to play critical roles in the Pacific and the Pentagon, including one who served as General MacArthur's personal interpreter during the occupation of Japan.
The Kibe, even though they were suspected by their own people, own fellow soldiers, they were the most valuable, in my opinion, because when it comes to deciphering these documents like the social, we had that. We went to the school and tried to learn that, but out in the field, you know, when you get these documents, they're scribbled. And unless it comes like second nature, you're not going to be able to decipher that. So I always maintained that they were the most valuable.
Army at that time recognized only three kinds of religion. One was Catholic, one was Protestant, and one was Jewish. And if you didn't fit into one of the three categories, they usually stamped you Protestant. Well, I told the guy I was Buddhist, and he said, we don't have that. So we'll make you a Protestant. And he put a P on it. Well, when we were on Angel Island, before we went overseas, they had to update our tetanus shots. The first one I had was in 42, so I had T42. They put T43 to show that I had this booster. And this GI was just pounding away on this metallic printing machine. And I said, hey, by the way, I said, I have a P on here, but I'm really a Buddhist. Do you think you could put a B on there? The guy said, well, I've never heard of a B, but if you want a B, I'll give you a B. And he put a B on top of the, superimposed it on the P.
We were told that we're going overseas. Exact country was never given us as India or Burma or anything. We were going overseas, and we're going into combat. We might be the first United States Army troops in continental Asia. So then 75% casualty is expected, see. With that in mind, the colonel told us, you have been selected to lead this group. Yeah.
I put out a sign asking for volunteers to a mission, to a very dangerous mission, return not guaranteed. And lo and behold, I thought the whole school had volunteered because there were so many names on that list. I mean, not only amazed me, but made me feel very good.
After their training, the linguists would never again know that special companionship they had. Being so scarce, they would be assigned in ones and twos in the Pacific campaigns.
I think as a Nisei, you know, being in service, we all had a goal that we were going to prove ourselves to be loyal and good a citizen as anybody else. And I think it was up to each one of us, and I don't think this is anything that was discussed. It was sort of a mutual understanding that no one was going to let the next guy down.
The Nisei military intelligence linguists were eventually to serve in every branch of the U.S. military and to be attached to Allied forces, British, Dutch, Chinese, Australian. They went with the troops into every major campaign of the Asia-Pacific theater. Sometimes in combat, they even crossed enemy lines to overhear their plans and tap communication lines. The Nisei linguists handled many jobs in developing combat intelligence about the enemy. They translated millions of pages of documents, deciphered enemy codes, and helped to staff intelligence centers in Brisbane, Australia, New Delhi, Chongqing, Manila, and Honolulu. And the goal, to find out the location of enemy ships, airfields and artillery, troop movements, supply lines, weapons, and equipment. One particular document captured from a Japanese admiral called Operation Z gave the full details for Japan's defense of the Marianas and the Philippines. Fished out of a wrecked plane by Filipino guerrillas, the document was rushed by submarine to Addis in Brisbane, where a team of linguists worked feverishly to translate the Z plan and send forth the vital information to the Navy and Army commands. Major U.S. successes at the Battle of the Philippine Sea and the Battle of Leyte Gulf benefited from this intelligence. The linguists also did propaganda to weaken the enemy's morale and will to fight, and to encourage surrender. It's been said that General MacArthur in the Pacific War knew more in advance about the enemy than any commander in military history. The record, however, is conspicuously silent about the men who were critical in gathering the intelligence that saved thousands of lives and helped shorten the war.
I have letters wherein the names of the Nisei boys have been cut out. I believe that the censors were instructed to do that, so that this was a policy of the U.S. Army. And so that for these last 40-odd years, the publicity which the Nisei should have been given for the work they did during the Pacific Theater operation has never been publicized to any extent. It's missing in any of the histories. It's missing in any of the documentaries. It's missing in all of the historical records which the troops themselves wrote up. The Marines never mentioned the interpreters.
Well, that was an extra burden those who served in the military intelligence had to carry, that they could not publicly be recognized because they were on secret missions.
The Nisei were the only soldiers who could do the job they did because of the language and cultural backgrounds. They were doing the work which would most clearly demonstrate their loyalty, but they had to keep that work a secret. And their parents in relocation camps could not benefit from their irreplaceable contribution. Serving anonymously was therefore self-sacrificing beyond the loss of personal recognition.
I wanted to know where the machine gun was. I didn't know how many there were. I never said that. I said, hey, you had 7 machine guns there. No, there's only 3 of them. Only 3? Well, let's go here. So I pull up the map and say, where was it? 1, 2, 3. So we let the communication people know, give them the coordinate. Pretty soon, what they did was the rear artillery hit a whole volley of shells, and we used to get them. The Japanese are never taught to surrender. An American, when he's captured, he knew the international law. You gave your name, rank, and serial number, but the Japanese didn't know that.
Los Negros was held by Japanese Marines. And one day, we captured a Marine soldier. He was full of holes around his chest, obviously had gangrene setting in, and he was unconscious. And I waited till he came to, and when he saw me, he looked up, his eyes became that big, and said, "Are you a Japanese?" And I said, "You're a prisoner of war." He says, "Kill me. I want to die. Kill me." And that's all he said. And we couldn't get any information from him after that.
first feeling I have for these people are pity. Regardless who it is, pity. And why pity? Because let's say I was in his position, far away from home, a family in the back, this and that, and he left all that and came here. So did I, but I'm not the captive. He is. Without feeling, you can't interrogate. No. Most of them, many of them at the beginning, they just clam up. They won't say a word for 10, 15, 20 minutes. Then, are you comfortable? You want a cigarette or something of that sort? Then they'll have to answer yes. Or, do you smoke? They have to answer yes or no. And once they start talking, most of them, they want to talk whatever is most dear or uppermost in their mind. And it's not money. It's not anything to do with the combat or anything. It's the rice harvest. Many of them write, this year the rice harvest, the field must be all ripe by now, and all those things they write, see? Because all their life they spend on the farm, this particular person, see? Then as long as you dwell along that line, he's going to join you in discussing all those things. And when the appropriate time comes, bring out all your wife, your children, all must be really suffering with you over here. Who's the breadwinner? Who's taking in all the harvest? Who's doing the planting or whatever it is? Then, at the opportune moment, just go in with the question that you want about his unit, then his position in the unit, and why he was in this area, and what was your objective in this area, and if your objective was to capture the street, after you capture, what are you going to do? They will come out with it.
I knew, and they knew, that they were superior linguists. Superior in many ways. They had everything that I could have asked. Leadership ability, if I needed that. Ability to improvise. Ability to interrogate under the most difficult circumstances. Sitting on the edge of a foxhole in the mud. Confronting a prisoner who was dying. This takes great ability. To talk someone to death is not an easy job.
We had a prisoner that was wounded seriously. It was very important to get whatever information we could from him immediately because of the situation that the unit was confronted with. And so I talked to him, and he understood what I was saying, but he was in extreme pain because he'd been shot in the stomach. And the one thing he kept asking me was whether he was going to die. And so I asked the doctor, I said, he wants to know if he's going to die. And the doctor said, tell him that we'll take care of him, he'll be okay. And so I told him that. And I kept asking him for this information, but he died while I was still talking to him, while I was still interrogating him. When it came time for a landing combat situation, if we were assigned bodyguards, it was very difficult for them because they had to stay with us 24 hours a day. We slept in the same foxholes. We ate together. When we were working, they were nearby, and we went to the latrine together.
The one thing I was afraid of was that the Marines were going to shoot at our boys because they shot anything that moved that looked Oriental. So I had to make sure that I had my team with me at all times.
The Nisei linguists, such as my 10, were a precious commodity. I had to protect them. While they looked after me, in a way, I must look after them to keep them from danger.
When I first got to know these 37 Infantry Ohio boys, some of them, especially around division headquarters, had not seen a Japanese soldier face to face. And so they would ask me, hey, what does a Jap look like? So, well, if you're talking about what he looks like physically, I said, hell, he's not much different from the way I look.
A couple of times I was in a situation where I was mistaken for a Japanese soldier. And the first time was on New Britain Island. There were a lot of soldiers around, but suddenly this one soldier looked up, he saw me, and he got his rifle and he pointed it at me, and I realized what the situation was. It wasn't a good situation, so I started talking to him. And the more I talked to him, the more he seemed to get confused.
We were concerned about possible capture. We didn't know what might have happened to one of them if he were captured by the enemy.
B Battalion happened to be isolated, cut off from the rest of the unit in one of the bloodiest battle of North Burma. Bob Honda, who's now deceased, and who happened to be the team leader of that group, went around after surviving numerous banzai charges about the Japanese, went around to each one of the interpreters in his group and said to them, well, if it appears that we will be captured, I'm saving a bullet for each one of you. And rather than to have you captured and be tortured, I'm going to put an end to your lives.
I joined the 502 paratrooper on Leyte Island, and then one day this captain of intelligence asked me if I would make a combat jump operation. I told him, yeah, I would. So the first thing he did was tell one of the sergeants to take me out, show me how to jump out of an airplane. So he took me to a little hutment, and there was a doorway in the hutment. And he told me, okay, Harry, all you have to do is jump out like this. So I'd jump out. And he said, one more time, Harry, that's great. I just jumped out of the doorway. He says, great, terrific. So that was it. 1 week after my practice jump was the real thing. They were going to make combat jump. They broke down camp. Everything was rolled up, ready to go. I had my rifle, my ammunition, my water, my food, my parachute, my helmet, ready to go. Had it all set into this Jeep to be taken to the airport. I was supposed to ride on this Jeep with this captain.
The Jeep went off without Harry. Later, he found only his parachute, but no food, no water, no rifle or helmet to protect him, and the captain asked, are you coming or not?
And I looked at that parachute for a long while. I thought about it. I didn't want him to think that I chickened out, especially this officer. So it was time to get on. I just dropped on my parachute and got on the airplane.
Corregidor's jump area was the size of a football field. If you missed, you would land in the ocean, hit sharp trees and rocks, or fall into the hands of the enemy. His fellow soldiers gave Harry a gun. He was the only Nisei linguist on the jump.
I just felt that I had to jump, and I'll just take whatever comes as the consequences. It wasn't that I felt brave or I wanted to feel that I was a hero. I just felt that under the circumstances, I figured that another Nisei would probably do the same.
Saipan was the first time U.S. soldiers encountered Japanese civilians. The civilians, believing propaganda that American soldiers would commit atrocities, were throwing themselves, whole families, off cliffs rather than risk capture. The waters below were covered with floating bodies. The Nisei linguists stepped in, working against time to convince people they were in no danger if they surrendered. Hiding among the civilians were Japanese soldiers and snipers, and if surrender failed, the Army would use flamethrowers and dynamite.
During the mop-up on Saipan, the Japanese were hiding in caves in Huichi-Kubo. He was with one of the frontline regiments at the time, and he volunteered to go down in this cave. There was just a narrow little path to get down there, and so that the Japanese soldiers in the cave could shoot him very easily.
I went down a cliff about 100 feet down, roped myself down there, and I thought, well, I might see some soldiers there anyway. So I took off my helmet to let them know that I look like a Japanese, which I am. They said, well, how come you are Japanese? How come you're fighting for the United States? I said, well, if you can remember, there's a saying, I spoke it in Japanese. In the history of Japan, there was a son fighting his father. The father was not with the emperor, and he wanted his son to side with him. So I said, ko naran to hosseba chunaran. Chunaran to hosseba konan. This means that in English you would say, in English it would mean that if I want to be good to my parents, I cannot be loyal to my country. If I want to be loyal to my country, I cannot be loyal, I cannot be good to my filial piety or good to my parents. So when I said that, all of them stood up and took a deep bow. In fact, the leader of the group, I believe he was a sergeant there. I can't remember, it's quite a while ago. He bowed his head and said, we're sorry we mentioned it. So I said, well, anyway, I'm going to give you, this is the way it's set up. My company commander up there, he's holding back a group of 500 people there. There was only about, I'd say, only about 68 of theirs left. He's going to come down there and everybody's going to kill. Why should you all be killed? If you don't want to surrender, let me take this woman and children. They're innocent people. Let them come up. And if you guys want to die, we'll come down and help you die. But if you want to surrender, we'll get you.
Interrogating this prisoner, and all our troops were eager for souvenir because I had a stack of documents on my side, and I was glancing through them while I was interrogating the prisoner. Then they closed in so tight that I couldn't see my prisoner, so I told them to step back, which everybody did, except one soldier. And I told the soldier, get your ass back because I can't work. And I looked up there. I saw my commanding general. So the general smiled at me and said, okay, man, I'm stepping back. So the whole GI laughed. And after the general left, the Japanese soldier asked me, who was that officer? He had 2 stars on his collar. I said, well, that was my commanding general. Now, I'm telling you, in my army, I could tell my general that. He laughs and he stepped back. So what would have happened to your army? He says, so the Japanese soldier tells me, if I said that to my sergeant, and he was a first-class private, he said the sergeant would have took his pistol and shot me dead right there.
The first Japanese Nisei lieutenant I met was very kind. It was right after our capture, and I feared that I might get killed at any moment. But he was so kind, I will never forget the good treatment I received.
Kiyofumi Kojima had been the signal officer on the Yamato, the world's largest battleship at that time. Shortly after his capture on the Philippines, he heard that his ship, thought to be unsinkable, was lost.
それでね、次のキャンプにようやく着いたわけです。そしたらね、このゲートのところで
American soldiers appeared at the gate. I was surprised to see many different people, all colors of hair, blonde, silver, brown, black, and gray. Different colored eyes, blue, brown, black, and green. Skin, white, yellow, and black. We are surrounded by all those people. When I saw those people staring at us, I thought Japan was fighting every race in the world.
そのいろんな民族の人がね、一つの国家を作ってると。
It was beyond my imagination that a nation could consist of different races. For I only knew a homogeneous country like Japan.
Many of them just couldn't get over it. That we Japanese, speaking Japanese, were born in the United States and fighting for the United States Army. No, I'm not fighting for the United States. I'm fighting for my life in country. Same country like you fighting for your life in your country. I'm not fighting for the United States. I'm fighting for my country, which is United States. Man, they say, hey, anyone born in that country will fight for that country, regardless of, because it's inside you. It's not what you come out of the mouth later. Not something that comes out of your mouth or my mouth or anything. It's inside of you that cannot be taken away.
In the Pacific War, America was finally closing in on Japan and Okinawa. Japan's youths readied themselves for the desperate mission to defend the homeland against the enemy at their doorstep. Kamikaze pilots and replacement troops were going off to make a last stand on Okinawa. The battle for Okinawa lasted 83 days at a terrible cost. 12,000 GIs and 110,000 Japanese soldiers perished. Japan had run out of trained pilots, and these young men stood between their homeland and the invasion forces.
To that extent, they were very militant, strong, disciplined soldiers, and they fought very well.
Our platoon captured a Japanese field hospital, and we found about 20 wounded Japanese soldiers in there. Actually, they were dying of malnutrition, and each had a hand grenade in their hand, but they were so weak that they were unable to pull the pin even to commit suicide. I lifted one of the Japanese soldiers up, called to him, shook him, and he opened his eyes, and he looked at me, and with an obvious sigh of relief, he said in Japanese, "Thank God that you're one of my own troops." And I just, at that time, I didn't have the heart to tell him that, no, I was an American soldier. I just said to him that you're all right now.
Well, after participating in combat, to this day, it bothers my conscience for taking a fellow human being's life. Mankind never learns any lesson from his past. Every big war comes about every generation. They said this is the war to end all wars. I don't know how many we're going to have before mankind will get wise to themselves and stop killing off each other.
My family lived in Hiroshima. To the best of my knowledge, they were still there. I was instructed to go to the POW camp and to explain to some of the officers there that the United States had dropped a bomb, an atomic bomb, and on Hiroshima, and had this one bomb had just wiped out the entire city. That really bothered me. I couldn't understand, well, why did they pick Hiroshima?
Nisei linguists played key roles in the surrender of Japanese forces everywhere. The head of Allied translation in Australia said of the linguists, "Your country owes you and your families a debt which it will never be able to fully repay."
It so happens that I was one of the first to go into Atsugi Air Base, which is outside of Tokyo, with General MacArthur.
Tom Sakamoto was also present at the formal surrender ceremonies aboard the USS Missouri.
My impressions on Battleship Missouri, September 2nd, 1945, Yokohama. This morning I got up at 5 a.m. and went with the others to this unit to the surrender ceremony. It was very impressive and memorable. The impression I got of the whole thing was like a huge lion in a cage who had cornered a tiny, timid-looking mouse. When Foreign Minister Shigemitsu and followers came up the walk in front of all the Allied representatives, there was an uncomfortable silence. Added to it were the solemn, still faces of the Japanese delegates. If ever the Japanese people suffered hardship from this war, it was today, this moment, I am sure.
In Hawaii, families turned out for a hero's welcome. But on the mainland, for families coming out of camp, what would it be like coming home?
My homecoming was a painful one. I had to write ahead in order to get approval to visit my family. That was the first strange thing about homecoming, is I had to get approval to see my family. Second, when I got to Crystal City, I had to call the camp administration, and they had to assign me a time when I could come out to the camp and, according to their rules, sign in at the visitor center. I would meet my family in a visitor's cottage and would have an hour to visit them. I still have visions of my folks who were off there, away from where the taxi had driven up. I heard their voices greeting me. And I went up to the fence, touched their hands. My mother said, "Okairi." She said, "I knew you'd come home."
After that, it was just a formality of going in, signing in, and having to go in the visitor's cottage and sit at a couch with an armed guard standing behind us. You know, he had a pistol on his side. And, you know, just standing there overseeing us as we had this family reunion.
We had a visiting room, and it was just like any prison in which they were on one side of a table and you were on the other side. We could really have him in our home. We could cook for him. We could do any of those things you want to do for a returning loved one, but be there and see him and talk to him. So it was very strained and very tearful situation, very hard.
If there was a reason for my ever to be bitter, I guess this could have been one of the reasons. And yet, darn it, you know, forever the loyal American lives. This is something we had to take, you know, part of the shit we always take.
The day after Pearl Harbor, Rudy Tokiwa and his brother were stopped from going into their high school by a group of white students. Rudy and his brother were on the football team, and their teammates came to help in the big fight that followed. The principal decided that only the Tokiwa brothers were to blame and expelled them from school.
And as I was leaving, I turned around and said, "Someday I'll get even with you." After the war, I came back to San Jose, California. And all this time, it always stuck in my mind that this was unfair what they did to us. Even at the school, they didn't treat us right. So therefore, I made up my mind that I was going to go back to Salinas High School, and I was going to confront this principal again. So it must have been after I was back here for about a week, I got down to Salinas, and I was very fortunate because that happened to be one of those days when they had assembly. The principal was there talking away, and so as he was talking away, I went up and I tapped him and I said, "Do you remember me?" And he said, "Well, no." He says, "Oh," I said, "Well, I'm the guy that you said was a troublemaker." And I says, "I think I've done my share for this country. I don't see anything that you've done." And I says, "I want you to apologize to me right now for kicking me out of school when I didn't do a damn thing that was wrong." And he looked at me and he started to say that I know that I was going to be a troublemaker and everything. I just looked, all I'm asking for you is either apologize or I'll wipe the stage with you. I don't give a damn which. And that's when he actually apologized to me, which made me feel like, well, one job accomplished.
Frank Hachia's homecoming to Hood River, Oregon, would be that of a hero whose body was being brought home to rest. A linguist in the Army intelligence, he had volunteered to go out on a patrol and was killed on Leyte by a sniper. His friend, Monroe Sweetland, saw to it that Frank's body was returned to his hometown.
Of course, I was old enough, almost old enough to be his father at the time. I was impressed with this very modest, even shy young man who underneath had a good deal of boiling and who was, I thought, going somewhere.
Bringing Hachia's body home was not a simple matter. The names of 16 young Nisei servicemen had been erased from the town's honor roll. The press drew national attention to Hood River and the honor roll incident. So the American Legion put the 16 Japanese-American names back on the county courthouse wall. Frank Hachia's return became a symbol of how amends could be made.
Mr. Hachia told me that Hood River was their home, and that Frank had gone to school there, had known the boys and girls there, and that would be the appropriate place. But that he didn't want another disturbance in Hood River.
Frank Hachia finally came home. At his funeral, his 8th grade teacher, Martha Ferguson McCune, read from a letter Frank had written her from overseas.
I read where some people stated that they did not fully appreciate their country until they had traveled abroad. And I realize it now. I am not very handy with words. The love of one's country, it is a strange and mystifying thing. When I look back over life and think of the time I have wasted in ignorance of how to live, how I did not value time, it hurts me now. I am aware of the fact that life is a gift. I shall be grateful of one thing to the war. That is in making me realize life.
This speech was taken in 1944. This is me, and this is Francois, and this is Mr. Bravo. Our section was selected this place to pile up the ammunition. And after this, place was selected, we had the place to stay. It was getting cold, it was freezing. And looking around, and this madam saw me freezing. So he invited me to come to the house. Francois, he was about just 1 year old. My real thing is, the short time I stay here, I get real close with these people, man. Really, the friendship, the warm heart. Hawaii call aloha. And that's what I really appreciate. After 40 years, I met these people again.
On avait toujours espoir de revoir notre ami qu'on avait gardé un bon souvenir ici. Il avait gardé le petit pendant qu'on allait arracher les pommes de terre. Et puis, on a toujours espéré le revoir.
Finalement, je crois que les gens heureux n'ont pas d'histoire. Mais on n'est pas forcément heureux parce qu'on a ces 4 membres. J'ai perdu une jambe, c'est certain, j'ai perdu beaucoup de choses au cours de cette guerre, mais enfin, j'ai trouvé quelque chose de fantastique, l'amitié. Et je crois que jusqu'à la fin de mes jours, cette amitié pour les Nisei, je la garderai intacte. Et je la transmettrai à mon fils. Il connaît toute l'histoire des Nisei. Et si Dieu me prête vie, j'espère que à mon petit-fils également, je lui apprendrai ce qu'ont fait les Nisei ici à Bruyères.
Our parents taught us a lot of things. Of course, we weren't conscious of those values that were being passed down to us. I remember this friend of mine, his name is Tomoto Shimizu, told me that his father told him, fight well for your country. And the most important thing is, don't bring shame to the family. On this particular day, while waiting transportation to pick him up, to take him back to the rear area, a call came in to the headquarters asking for volunteers to pick up a dead lieutenant's body. So hearing that, Tomozu said, well, I'll do one more favor for the boys before I leave for home. Let me go out with the gang. So he volunteered to go out. He didn't have to, but he did. And 4 guys went to the 4 corners of the body and picked up the bodies. And as they did so, a mine blew up. In other words, the Germans had mined the bodies. So Tomozu was shot all over the back, and he lost his arm. He finally came back to Waipahu, to his own home. In those days, they still had this old plantation furrows. At the end of the workday, all the workers would go there and take a bath. So Tomozu used to go to this Camp Furrow. But now, when he went to the furrow with a towel over his arm, with a soap in his hand and so forth, his father would follow him. And in the bed, in the furrow, the father would scrub the son's back. What the father had told the son, really meant something. It was not just fancy words, nice repetitive words that the lineage told him to say to his son. It had a force of meanings. And to me, the father scrubbing the son's back put the whole thing together, say, from beginning to end. And but this is one of the things that kind of held the unit, the boys together. What made them so strong as a fighting force? It's little things like this, that you can't preach, that you don't, read out of textbooks, paragraph A, B, C, so forth and so on. But somehow you've got to sort of catch it from your parents or whoever you're getting this lesson from, say. And somewhere in the line, somewhere out there in your life, wherever it may fall, when this thing drops into place, it steadies you.
There's a lot of history in this courtroom, especially for the Nisei generation, our parents' generation. In this courthouse, the Tolan Committee hearings were held. In the same courthouse, the trial of Fred Korematsu was also held.
A number of people who have come up and said, I'm so happy to see you sansei taking part in this. It makes me feel good as a sansei to hear someone from my parents' generation say that, because we are trying to do something for them, and we owe them that.
In one's lifetime, I think it's rare that you have such an opportunity to repay or pay homage, in a sense, to your parents for what they were able to do for you in a symbolic way by attacking the legal basis for what was done to them 40 years ago.